When I tell you we need D3 for this conversation, I had to top it off to start us off. Nearly 34.8 million, that's the number, of children ages 0 to 17 are exposed to adverse childhood experiences that can severely harm their future health and well-being. All right? 34.8 million children. And this is a result of trauma that shows up in our family structure. Come on, we getting in the holidays and that trauma shows up. It gets triggered in our family gatherings. Why? Because much of this is caused by our loved ones. Much of it is caused by those in our immediate community or extended community. And yeah, it shows up at the holiday table often or in those gatherings. So tonight, and you know we need to detox that, right? So tonight we're discussing detoxing relationships for better health, all right? And I had to bring on none other than licensed clinical psychotherapist, Precious, I'm going to get her name right, Avorkliyah. Avorkliyah. That's right. I think I got it right, Precious. Precious Avorkliyah, who's a licensed clinical psychotherapist. We had to bring in the big guns to have this conversation because we're carrying around too much trauma. We are allowing it to affect our health. So stop, share this with someone you know needs it. Okay, and I'm going to bring on Precious. But first, let me welcome you to Detox Living, where we bring you tips, truths, and testimonials to power your toxic-free living. I'm your host, Coach Gessie. I am the fibroid survivor turned health activist and founder of the detoxnow.com, a holistic health platform that provides education and supplements to combat the health disparities that lead to obesity, chronic disease, reproductive health damage, as well as lower life expectancy rates. So welcome tonight. I want you to help me bring on my guest. Oh, here she is. She's here. There she
is. Hey, pretty lady.
Hey, girl. Look at that gorgeous smile.
Thank you. And you did get it right. Kudos to you. There are many that have known me for years and still cannot get it right. So go ahead, girl.
Hey. I didn't want to add no trauma because, you know, sometimes you just get that trigger like they ain't never going to get my name right.
Man. And you just helped it melt right on off.
Hey. Well, I thank you so much, for making the time to have this conversation. You know, I thought who better to chat with because, you know, it'll be eggshells around that table, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
People walking in and, you know, it's, is this one going to be here? Is that one going to be there? This one has been responsible for traumatizing someone else. There's so much that goes on in these family gatherings.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. I mean, we have, you know, what comes to mind for me is how, you know, I love our community, right? But it's kind of our resilience, but it's also our almost impairment that what happens is that we use our traumas in a joking manner. And while that may be how some people heal and process, to a lot of people, it ends up being furthering the injury. So, you know, I think it's in the humor around the table. I think it is in the reoccurring or the repetition of past behaviors and you know, patterns and what have you that have
and
just
even
been
maybe minimalizing it. Would you say even minimalizing it because it's like, oh, you still dealing with that, you know? Or for my people who are dealing with infertility, that's a big one that comes up around the holidays. I know I remember many years like, oh, you know, maybe next year we'll have a baby, right?
Oh yeah,
or,
for sure.
you know,
For
and
sure. Minimizing is a big one. I think just discrediting people's experiences and, just continuing to perpetuate those the same messaging, behind, oh, well, that's been happening in our family for years.
yeah.
That's one that's like, ooh, you just feel it in your chest, and
Aren't you over that
right.
yet?
Right, right. And I think that, what happens is that there's also some, differences in
Hmm.
generations where I was just saying this to a client the other day that there is one generation that was almost our survivalist
Girl,
generation,
I
right?
couldn't even think about self-care and
Right.
emotional health. They were just
So
trying to stay alive.
what that means is they are also the endurant generation. We just endure. We just deal with it, right? Like
Oh,
it just is what it is. Like grandma's been like that for all her life, just show up, just be present. Whereas we are the generation of ain't nobody got time for that,
right,
right? So we are the generation of if you're toxic, I'm
right,
gone. And
right.
then what happens is then you get the minimization, then you get the discrediting, then you get the guilt and
Mhm.
shame
Yeah,
of, oh, so you're not going to stick around until we're all hanging out in the living room? No,
right.
I'm about to get gone,
Oh,
right?
you
I'm
know,
about to get
she's
gone.
the and then it becomes she's just sedity, or she's just too sensitive, and
Or she's
like,
mean and she's rude, or wait for it. She is selfish.
oh, why? Because you're
Yeah.
choosing to choosing your peace, because you're
Because you're
choosing your peace. You're
losing your peace.
choosing to have healthy boundaries, sis.
Absolutely.
Choosing to determine what you will allow in your space and what you
Right,
won't, right?
right, right,
And and
right.
and it's a lot, like we jumped right in, but I didn't even get to tell about your story. So let's back up for a second. For a
Yeah,
second.
for
Tell
sure.
us, because you jumped
I
right in
told you
with the
when
like
you were
boom, boom,
like,
boom, 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 heavy guns.
I said, it's always, we are off to the races every time
Yes,
we get together. So
every
I'm not surprised.
like every
I'm
time,
not surprised.
girl, because that connection is like, yes,
Right.
yes. But tell the people in them who is Precious, and how did you
Yeah, tell the
how did
people and them.
tell the people, and how did you get into this work,
Yeah.
and why is it so important to you, and what does that look like in your, your assignment and your
Yeah.
calling?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for asking. So, I am a licensed psychotherapist. I'm also an author. I'm a mental health advocate and an inspirational speaker. And, all the other things that we do on the side. I'm a mom and all those good things.
That ain't the side.
Um,
That's ooh, child,
oh, yeah, it's definitely not the
that ain't
side.
the side.
You are right. It is definitely not the side. But, so all of those other things that we are, and all of our different layers, of course.
Yes.
But I've been in the field now for pressing on to about 20 years. I started
Wow.
my
Well,
career.
you only look like 25. Stop it, girl.
Thank you,
Girl,
girl.
stop it. Girl,
Oh,
stop,
you there,
stop.
right there with me. We celebrating our 25th together for sure.
Reverse that. It's 52.
That's right. There we go. But yeah, so I've been all throughout this field, kind of came out the gate super green, wanting to just learn and absorb everything. I entered into private practice, maybe around 2013, and I entered into a group practice.
Wow.
But I had this burning desire to kind of do therapy my way and
Mm. He
for
said,
my
not like
community.
y'all.
So I
That
left
part.
in 2018 and I formed my own boutique private practice called Modern Therapy Now, where I service primarily Black and Brown women and, women primarily in general, right? So, I do work with other cultures and other races of women as well,
Mm-hmm.
but that is my largest population.
Mm-hmm.
But I work with them around trauma, around learning themselves, learning their truth, living an authentic existence,
Yes.
living a life worth living.
Yes.
So this subject matter in particular comes up often. I will
Yeah.
tell you that just in this short week, we're on Wednesday, in this short week, I've had this conversation several
I can
times
imagine.
about even leading up to the holiday,
Yeah, the
things that have
anxiety.
already
I'm sure there's
occurred.
anxiety
Yeah, yeah, but
leading up to
even
the
like
holiday.
family just being off to the races.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're already, you know, oh, so this person ain't gonna do this and you're not gonna come here, or we're inviting that person that injured you, or we're inviting that person
Yes.
that triggers you.
Say that part.
Right?
Inviting the person that injured you and want me to act like everything's okay.
Right. Because that's what the endurant generation would say. Right? That's what they would ask you of. So yeah, so this is my subject matter for sure. This is the work that I do ongoing. I always say my little saying for my practice is real people heal people. So when I say that I left the group practice for my own independent practice, it was because I wanted to be my authentic self in the room and support people from a place of, yeah, me too. You were depressed last week. You were in bed last week. Yep. Been there, right? Just dismantling a lot of the stigma and a lot of the separation that happens in therapy. You know, a lot of times you feel like people are, you know, just there's this disconnect in therapy. And I think that has plagued or even just driven a lot of people from therapy. So just wanting to be
a big gap and people feeling like, oh, wait a minute, you can't even relate to me.
Right. Right. So I show up as my authentic self. I talk how I talk. I dress how I dress. I am who I am. And I've found that has helped people really open up to the process of therapy in a different way, or at least my people. I always say that the universe sends me my people. So, so yeah, so that's me in a nutshell. That's the work that I do.
I love it. So I'm going to jump into our questions because
let's go.
So what impact does being around toxic family members have on stress levels, and how does that affect your overall health and well-being? You know, I really care about that one.
Oh, absolutely. So immensely, right? So being around toxic individuals, people who re-traumatize you, people who trigger you, absolutely increases stress levels. And we all know that when stress levels go up, all types of health issues come on down.
High blood pressure, triggers diabetes, triggers lupus, triggers your inflammatory issues, triggers everything, right?
Of
fibroids, huge. There was a reason why there was such a fibroids boom during the pandemic. Why? Because of the stress, chronic stress, right?
Right. And even the day-to-day stuff that, you know, some people are detached from, how it may be stress induced, right? So tension headaches, sinus headaches. One of the big ones that I can see like visibly on people is just the neck and shoulder tension. It affects people's respiration. A lot of people, I tell people all the time that most people are not actively doing enough respiration for their body.
No, they're breathing.
Right? So, you know, I used to tell people, you only breathe at the top of your chest, you know, like, so you'll see where there's this very shallow breathing and there isn't this like full on rise and fall of their chest happening. So even looking at that, and then when you're not oxygenated, right, that's poor sleep. Right? That's poor sleep, that's poor energy. You can't exercise, you can't concentrate, you have brain fog. So all of these things are stress related and they're happening on your day-to-day basis. And I want to point that out because those are your warning signs before you get to blood pressure, right? High blood pressure, before you get to diabetes.
I love that.
Get to those other things.
I love it. So let's go back to that. So I love to say that where your body is tensing up is a signal. It's a sign that, right? So everything from, like you said, tension headaches to, oh, maybe my feet are swelling. You know, I'm getting swelling.
Joint
your body
pain.
Joint pain, right? These are all signs that something is going on with your body. So pain is actually, you can listen to the whisper or you're going to have to respond to the scream, okay? So listen to the whisper. Look at it if it's just a change, like, what's going on there? Notice it. Notice it because it's an indicator that something is going on. Before, you know, high blood pressure is the #1 killer of Black women. More than 50% of Black women have high blood pressure and do not know it because it is a silent killer. And by the time they know it, it's too late, right? Or it's a crisis. So I love that you said notice and pay attention before, and it's triggered by that stress, which is a huge piece.
You know what I always tell my clients is to be sensory aware.
Yes.
Be sensory aware. an acknowledgement of how your five senses are being
Yes.
impacted, what kind of information you're receiving through them, right? Because
Yes.
we're talking about stress levels going up, we're talking about the body responding to it, we're talking about really all that is included in
Yeah.
anxiety, right? So
Yes.
now here we are, we're anxious because we're exposed to these triggers, we're sitting next to these toxic individuals, and what happens next? We're irritable.
Yeah.
We become explosive.
We don't even seem
We can become
like ourselves. We
volatile.
change. We don't even show up as ourselves
Yeah,
anymore because we're being
right.
triggered, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then you find yourself acting out of character, right?
Yes.
So now you have entered into the toxic system yourself,
Self-sabotage,
right? And you
self-sabotaging.
know what
Yeah.
I call it? Self-betrayal. I call it
Yes. Yes.
self-betrayal because a lot of times from when you come down from all of that, now there's shame, now there's guilt,
Girl,
right?
preach.
So it becomes so very cyclic, you
Yeah.
know, and so harmful, not just for relationships. I don't want to make this about those toxic characters in your life. It impairs your relationship to self.
Girl,
Yeah.
right here. Self.
Right.
Self. Because if I
Right.
can't trust myself to protect myself, trust myself to support myself, right?
Right.
That it becomes like the number one betrayal, what you just said. It's the
Absolutely.
number one betrayal.
Yeah.
And it leads to well-being literally decline, overall health decline.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you digging into that.
Sure.
So next question is, how does one um, establish boundaries during the holidays without feeling standoffish and reserved? And this is important because for me, one of the things is that you're not always going to get the consensus and support around your boundaries,
Yep.
right? Because, like you said, you have the generation that's the enduring generation,
Right.
and they basically want to just wash over it or
Mm-hmm.
sweep it under the rug, right?
Right.
Because that's what we did. This is how we handle it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you help your clients to navigate that?
Yeah. So, um, I am not the greatest supporter of trying to evade and avoid people's reactions to your boundaries.
That's right.
I feel like it is that thought process in and of itself that will
Mm-hmm.
drive you into self-betrayal and away from
Mm-hmm. Trying
self-preservation.
to control their outcomes,
Trying
trying
to
to control
control the outcomes, trying to
their
control anything beyond yourself, right?
yes.
And I think that people deserve the privilege of their own emotional response, right? And their own
I love
emotional process.
the way you said that.
It's not
People
fair.
deserve the privilege of their own emotional response. Like, that's
Absolutely.
okay. Have
And
it if you want. That's okay.
yes,
That's not my problem. That's yours.
absolutely. That is within your ecosystem, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and it's just not fair to ourselves. Like, goodness gracious, we have enough balls to juggle.
Yeah.
We do not need to juggle other people's emotional
Mm.
systems, right? Especially if we understand human behavior, we have to understand that you have no access to their emotional system. You
Mm.
weren't there when the emotional system was built, and you
Yeah.
have the least amount of impact on their emotional system. Most of the time, all we are is projecting onto one another,
Mm.
right? So if it is a projection, if their emotional response is a projection way back from a reference point of something that happened way back when that you weren't present for, how can you manage that, right?
Question. I feel like
How
we,
can you
we, we need a
impact
case study. We need, like, give me a, this is a lot of theory. What does that look like? Let's put that in tangible format, right?
that?
Like,
Yeah.
okay, give us a scenario of this
Okay.
happening, and so
So,
we can break it down. Because I get
so,
you, but I want it to be so simply clear, because
yeah,
people are going through this, and I want them to understand,
yeah,
like, the power that they
yeah,
have, the power that they have in not trying to control other people's outcomes,
for
like,
sure,
and
for sure.
and not allowing that to control them.
Yeah, yeah. So I would give, an example of, okay, so like parents, I think that that's a big
That's a
one,
good
right?
one.
I hear a lot of times people feeling like going home for the holidays, there is such a contradiction in emotions within themselves, right? You're excited, you want to see family, but you are like bracing yourself for
Mm,
what may happen. A lot of
mm.
people describe feeling like they go back into like their childhood
Childhood.
home, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden they are back as children all over again
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
experiencing
Good.
it
Good example.
almost similar to how they
Mhm.
did, right? So let's talk about parents then. So imagine that your mom had maybe a detached relationship with her mom,
Okay.
and grandma was hard-nosed
Mm-hmm.
parent. Grandma was an affectionate parent.
Okay.
Grandma was rules and regulations, and this is who you have to be as a
Mm-hmm.
woman, this is what a lady does,
Mm-hmm.
and anything beyond that was crass, a little cold.
Mm-hmm.
She was a part of the endurance
Endurance.
survivalistic
Endurance survivalist. Mm-hmm.
generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that mom then continues that
Yeah.
on. So when you go to mom and you say, well, this made me feel this way, and she's just like, oh, girl, get out of my face, right? With
Exactly.
agitation,
That's
with
that's
anger, right? It's for us to understand that that response is a part of her own emotional system, right?
right.
I always tell people that you have to understand that if someone has not delivered something to you emotionally, the kind of support that you need, the kind of feedback that you need, it is because it has not been placed
In
in
them.
them. And when people are being called to exercise a skill set that has not been placed in them, oftentimes what you'll get is protest and
Mm.
rejection and
Mm.
agitation,
Because they don't know what to do
because
with what you just
yeah,
brought. Like, what do I do
if
with
you
that?
got if you had a trigonometry um a problem
Hmm.
placed in front of you, what do you
Right.
start to feel inside of your body when you're trying to figure it out, and you just know you don't even have that
The
knowledge
tools.
base in you?
Right.
You are anxious, you are irritable, you are agitated, right? So
Hmm.
that's what happens to them. You have nothing to do with why mom would have reacted like that. But what happens to us is we start to believe within ourselves, like, she doesn't love me, she
Hmm.
doesn't support me, she doesn't believe in me, and that's why she responds to me in that way, right? Give people the privilege of their emotional response, and give yourself the privilege of not allowing it to be internalized,
So, but what
right?
if
So
that specifically makes you feel unloved, right?
mhm,
Because that specific, you're looking to, because you're saying give them that, give them that privilege of having their
mhm,
own emotional response,
yeah,
of course, right?
if
So,
it makes
but
you feel
you
unloved,
can feel,
feel give yourself the privilege of your
right,
feelings, right?
right.
So you get to this is the point where we say feelings aren't facts,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And that distinction is important, not to discount your feelings, but to create the separation where they are both placed in their respective spaces,
Mhm.
right? I always tell my clients that feelings create flow, and then you arrive at perspective.
Mhm.
Perspective should never precede your feelings, because perspective before feelings just feels like
Yeah.
invalidation, right? If I come to you and I'm hurt and I'm telling you what happened, and you're like, well, like, at the end of the day, right, I'm already feeling like you
You
don't
didn't
hear me.
listen to me. You haven't heard me. You
Yeah,
don't
you are
connect.
not
You
hearing me.
don't.
You are not with me. You're not being compassionate. I
Mhm.
wasn't ready for
Right.
perspective. It wasn't time for perspective. What I needed in this moment was space to feel my feelings, right?
Mhm.
So if it really makes you feel unloved, that is true for you within your own emotional system. Give yourself space to feel those things, and then when you're prepared, I always tell that your breath tells you when it's time to transition. When you're prepared to transition, then you give yourself perspective. I believe that it usually comes on the other end of a breath, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you've been crying, you've been upset. It's like, all right, and then you're probably more ripe to receive the perspective that might help you along. But I do want to go back to your original question about
Yes.
boundaries. Yes, I want boundaries to occur without trying to manage those things that are outside of your control. However, boundaries are things that you enact.
That's
Right?
right.
They are not boundaries are not something that require any grand statement. They don't even need to be spoken. They don't need to be shared. Boundaries are parameters within which you operate, right? So if you know that your mom's history was that she is not going to be compassionate, caring, attending to your emotions, if she's not going to give you dialogue to discuss it, then that may not be the place that you go.
That's right.
Right?
That may not
If
be the
she
safe
doesn't have
space.
it, she doesn't have it, right?
She ain't got it. She ain't got it.
Right. It's
It's
not
true.
in there.
You're right.
Right.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean, like, for in that instance, you may be developing and working and trying to create that connection. But understand that if you know she doesn't have it and
Mm-hmm.
you communicate
Right.
that, then that is setting yourself up for just what she's going to give you, right?
Yeah.
However, you could come to the table and say, you know what? I know she doesn't have it, but I'm still going to communicate it because I want to communicate it to honor what I'm feeling. But then,
Right.
you're not holding on to looking for a response from
Right.
her to
Right.
affirm you,
The way
right?
you go into courageous conversations is that you go to deliver, not to receive.
There you
Right?
go. Say that
Because
again. I love that.
receiving,
Say that
the
again.
way that you go into
Courageous conversations. Say that, because that right there will set somebody free. Because you're going in
absolutely.
there to receive, but a courageous conversation, you're doing it for you.
You have to do it for you. You have to do it to deliver, right? So that's the only part of the exchange that you have control over. You have to be prepared for people to be consistently who they've always proven themselves to be, unless they have proven otherwise consistently. I
Consistently.
always like to leave room because people do evolve, people do change. They
Absolutely.
just don't evolve and change in your timing and in a way that will help you avoid
Right.
injury, right?
Right.
So at some point, people will start to display different behavior, but allow them to display that difference of a behavior consistently, and then you can adopt that is who they've consistently proven themselves to be at that time.
So kind of getting it down to tips, right? Because again, people are going into these homes tomorrow. We're going into these homes into gathering as fam. Some of them are gathered right now, cooking,
Mm-hmm.
some of them are gathered in the kitchen now, and
Right.
you're, because you've been given a part to play and you have a part to play, and
Yep.
this one has a part to play, and so looking at these, what are some healthy habits that they can put in motion, that we can put in motion to find peace even in the middle of the holiday chaos,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So number one, set your own intentions, right? Set an intention anytime you're going into a space that you already have a sense has the potential to be disruptive for you. Set your intentions and allow your intentions to guide you. And what I mean by that is you decide for yourself what your role is going to be in that space and what type of experience you're going to have for that space. I always like to remind people, when you're setting intentions, and intention isn't like, oh, I'm going to have a good day. And then you get on the road, the first person that cuts you off, you're like, see, now this person has screwed up my day.
No.
Right? No, it is your will to say, listen, that person must have had somewhere to go. Anywho,
Mm-hmm.
turn up my music and let me just bop on my
Right.
way down the road, right?
Right.
So it's you staying close in proximity to the intention that you set, right? So it's a regulation that you have given to yourself. So when you are in that kitchen and you are sitting at that dinner table, you are almost doing emotional mental hopscotch, right? Like someone's over there talking some junk that like can stir something up. You redirect your attention over here,
Okay.
right? At the point that the group starts to get all stirred up and they're
Walk
triggering off
away.
of one another, you go ahead and, you know what, I'm gonna go take a breath,
That's
right?
it. I need to run to the store or something like that. It's like some tangible things are, okay, you know what? I'm not going to allow myself to get into certain
Mm-hmm.
conversations. I'm definitely not spending time and space with such and such person, right?
Right.
Or, you know what? This is not worth my emotional energy to be engaged in this kind of conversation,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or, you know what? I'm leaving by this time because I need time just for me,
Right.
right? Or like
Right.
when I'm thinking about like tangible things, like you just said, like, okay, I may need to go get a breath because you know what, this right here, I'm not gonna let myself get pulled into
Yeah.
it, right?
Absolutely. That's the best that you could do for
That is
yourself,
setting an
right?
intention. I'm
If
saying, no, I'm setting my intention that my peace, it is anything that is to rob me of my peace is too
Yep.
expensive. It's too
Yep.
expensive. I'm not willing to pay that
Absolutely.
price, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think that then that drives us into how we set our boundaries
Mhm.
and the skills that we're actually
So
employing, through
now
that.
determine what the boundaries are going to be. So in the
Right.
flow, set
Yep.
intentions. So the
Yep.
intention is what my vision is for myself,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
What the vision is for myself, what I'm looking for, the outcome in
Yep.
terms of for me,
And then
right?
let's
And then the
say that
boundary.
the boundaries are like the framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then your wellness skills are your
There you
tools,
go.
right? Those are like your tasks. Those are the ways that you keep yourself within your parameter, your safe parameter, and that's how you deliver yourself into your intention.
So what would be some of those? An example of a boundary that they might set would be, let's give an example.
Well, I'll give you a very simple example
Mm-hmm.
actually. I'm not going to talk about that.
That's it. Such a good one
I'm not.
because there are things that you know are going to treat. No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
today. No,
yeah,
we're not going
I'm
to talk
not
about
doing
that.
that. Oh, you remember when you were dating that
No,
one guy and he
no.
went upside your head?
People can't have conversations by themselves.
I'm not going to talk about that. And when I say that, I'm saying that as internal self-talk.
Right.
What there is on the outside is absence of talking about it, right?
I
Not
love it.
this is what we
You don't
do.
even have to say, I'm not going to talk about
You
that.
don't even have to say, I'm
You
not going
just
to
be
talk about
like,
that. And you definitely don't have to say, please don't talk about that. Because that's where we go.
that
We
triggers
go to trying
somebody. Because
to
that,
control, manage the space, right?
ooh, that's good.
People are going to be consistently who they've always proven themselves to be. People
Yeah.
are not who they are because of you. They did not show up in your life and decide that I'm going to be this person because of Coach Gessie,
Right.
right? They
That's who they
decided that they
are.
were going to be this person by way of their experiences, their
Yes.
reference point, their conditioning, and their own traumas, and the list goes on, right? So if we understand that we are not that grand to shift the trajectory of all that has been set forth in that person's life before they even landed in front of you, then we also understand that we cannot require them to be different before we have our wellness.
Right.
Right. So instead of saying, I'm not going to talk about that, or please don't talk about that, silence. When the subject matter comes up, they get your silence or they get your absence.
Now, what if they ask you a question? They say, hey, what's going on with that situation? You just act like they didn't even talk. You act like they didn't talk.
I think it's anything from pure silence. There's anything from, oh, I'm not sure. That's just not where I am right now. I'm not really discussing that right now. Or you could say, I'm sorry, I'm going to excuse myself.
I love so much of that because people don't even think that those are okay.
Yeah.
They are great.
The unfortunate
They're not just okay.
part is that we are burdened by this idea of we've been rude, by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But was it not rude that they brought up something that is tender to you? Right. So I think we have this tendency to elevate other people's opinion of us, or even their emotional system beyond our own. You have one objective here on earth before all else, and it's self-preservation.
Self-preservation.
Right? Survival. Right? Yeah. And the truth of the matter is that if your psyche isn't surviving, nothing else is really surviving either.
Health, y'all, health, emotional health is
Yeah.
so important, right? In order to function, in order to be, to contribute, show up for yourself and
Hmm.
for those who you love,
Yeah.
right? So I love these practical tools because for so long I think people are feeling like, but they're not gonna like it, but who cares? That's
Yeah.
it. Like that is the thing. It's like setting yourself free that it's okay for them not to like it. That's their right. That's their
And
privilege.
let
It's
me just bring a little clarity to that. What you see on the surface is that they don't like it. But what's happening is that you are an outlier to a toxic system that is in motion, right? And anytime there's an outlier, it feels like a threat, right? What most people struggle with is change.
yeah,
So if you start acting different, if you're not a participant, if you're not
right.
doing what we
You trying to
do,
break out of this toxicity? Isn't this
right?
what we always
Even
recycle?
if they themselves are impacted by the same toxic system,
It's
have
true.
incurred some of the same injury,
Yeah,
has experienced some of the same traumas,
yeah,
some people's awareness, their own self-awareness, their conscientiousness is not where yours may be,
right,
right?
right.
And we already said that it's not in them to get it.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't wait for them to be agreeable before you get your
No, ma'am.
wellness.
No, ma'am. That's about setting your intention, right?
Yeah.
So what are the
Yeah.
wellness tools you mentioned? So you've got, because we're
So
setting the intention that will establish the boundaries that are the guardrails, and
mhm.
we're using our wellness tools to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So wellness tools can range, right? And I just want to give this kind of like disclaimer.
Hmm.
I seldomly suggest wellness tools because wellness feels different to everybody.
Okay.
I had a client tell me one time she was going to go axe throwing, right? To relax. You know, I couldn't have predicted that.
Wow.
What I will say is that I believe that there are three elements of
Okay.
wellness. I think it's relaxation, decompression, and
So
fun,
the
right?
things that bring you there, things that actually fuel relaxation, decompression, and fun.
Yep,
Those are the tools. And they
yep,
may be different for each person,
exactly.
but it's those things. So for you, it may be go take a walk, right?
Relaxation.
That's a relaxation.
Hmm.
Decompression. Decompression may be, you know what? I need to go make a phone call to speak to a safe person because
There
I
we
need to
go.
get off the ledge right
Yep.
now,
That's
right?
decompression is when you let the tension out in some
Right.
kind of
Got to
way.
let the air out somewhere, but
Yeah.
not in a place where it's going to actually be, what do you call it, flammable?
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah, I did that, right? It
I
won't
love
be flammable, not a
that.
flammable, not a place where it's flammable.
I
And
love
then you
that.
said, and
Fun.
fun. It may be, you know
Fun.
what? Hey, that's my song. I got to go.
Fun is adrenaline engaging,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's
Right.
the big belly laugh.
Mm-hmm.
It's playing with the kids doing something silly.
Yep.
You know, it's frivolous.
Right. And
You
and
know,
that's to be present in that moment. Like, oh my goodness, hey,
right,
that's my jam.
right.
Boop. You
Listen,
done
fun
totally
will
flipped it,
disrupt the
disrupted.
whole system. You know, they tell you that just a smile, literally, because of the muscles that
Yeah.
you know, use in your face, can
Yeah.
release endorphins and improve your mood.
Mm-hmm.
Fun will disrupt that little funky feeling that
Mm.
someone already put on you. You turn your direction and you like, okay, I'm about to have a good time. Before you know, you forgot exactly
It's true. Like
what was happening.
you ever
Mm-hmm.
been in a an argument, right? Let's say you're having an
Mm-hmm.
argument, and next thing you know, somebody cracks a joke, and then really it just now you actually get a new perspective on the
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Because you had that moment of disruption to kind of push back some of what was going on in that moment. So I love that.
Absolutely.
All right, let me make sure I know our time. Ooh, God. Okay. Um, so I spoke about, oh, let me look at this one. What does mental health wellness look like to a person healing from trauma and toxicity in those scenarios for someone who is in a healing place?
Mhm. Yeah. So I would still say that those three components of wellness apply for sure,
Hmm.
right? But I think that if we're talking about where, you know, the trauma is really raw, it's on the surface, it's
Hmm.
easily, accessed,
Mm-hmm.
then I think it really does mean trying to curate your experience, right? So I will go trying to curate your
Mm-hmm.
experience. So I would go as far as already planning, you
Mm-hmm.
know, how much time you're going to spend in the
Mm-hmm.
space,
Or
right?
maybe not attending.
Or not attending. I, I always say, and also you could not,
You
right?
could
Like
not.
that, like not doing it, not
Yes.
going,
Yes.
not discussing it is always an option. That's why when you were like, so what will be the response? I said, silence can be a response.
Yes. Yes.
Not doing it
Yes.
can be not going. And you know what? And giving yourself an alternative experience that is self-soothing,
Yes.
right?
Do it doesn't
So it's
mean
like if
you
you're not gonna go to
miss
the big
out.
dinner,
Do something for you.
yeah, make yourself an experience at home. Throw your music on. Make yourself your own favorite dish, or don't.
Or
Right?
or accept an invitation to go celebrate where it's a safe
Where it
space.
feels safe. Go with your friends, go with your spouse,
Yes.
go with your coworkers, go where it makes sense. Do not succumb to the pressures, the shame, the
Mm-hmm.
guilt, or of you have to be here because this is family,
That's right.
because this is what we do, because
Yes.
everybody else is
Yes.
coming.
Preach,
What's wrong
preach,
with
preach,
you? Right?
preach,
So
preach,
yes,
preach. Come on,
absolutely.
y'all. I know y'all
And
feeling them
also
hearts. I
you
know it.
could not,
That's right.
right?
And you
Yeah.
could not.
Self-preservation cannot be placed in the hands of anyone else, right?
That's
No
right.
one
Oh,
can
oh, oh, oh,
self-preserve.
oh, don't drop
No
that
one
and
can
let that be. No,
self-preserve on your behalf,
that's it. No,
right?
self-preservation is not anyone else's job in your life. That's very
Absolutely.
important. It's not a job you can delegate. That is your personal job. Just like I say, we, especially as people of color, have to be radical about self-care and our health. We have to be radical about it. That's why we can't wait till we're sick. No, 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 no. We need to be listening to our bodies. We need to be feeling our feelings and inspecting them to see what they're
Be
saying. What are they
sensory
communicating?
aware.
Sensory
Be
aware,
sensory
as my girl
aware.
said.
What am I feeling? Take a second, take a pause point to check in with yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Allow yourself to be led. I tell my clients, be energy driven. Be agreeable to what your energy is telling you. Right? We go into so many spaces where it's just like, oh, I'm uncomfortable, and I
Yeah.
know I'm gonna have to deal with this and that. And also, like, that's your energy telling you, do an about
Yeah.
face. You know,
You
like,
know what?
don't go in
No.
that
You
direction.
feeling it for a reason.
Right.
I like to say it's this book I love is called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And they talk about exploring the iceberg, asking yourself, what am I mad about? What am I sad about? What am I glad about? And what am I afraid of? Those are those emotions that, wait a minute, check in myself on a regular basis.
Right.
Because that will lead us to putting boundaries up, right? Setting intentions, putting up boundaries exactly to direct and to protect and to, to create space around where we need, right? And then, as you said, to help us with a plan. I love this conversation so much. Okay, so I'm thinking about how, when someone has, again, going to that radical about self-care, right? When we look at self-preservation being our job, right? Self-preservation for me is that radical self-care, like loving myself enough to make sure that I'm not subjecting myself to harm intentionally, right? Or without, like, there's self-sacrifice, but self-sacrifice is not the same thing as self-betrayal. You share what does that mean to you? The
Yeah.
difference
Well,
between
you said one
self-sacrifice.
of my favorite things. You said radical self-care. That's like my
Girl,
favorite thing
that's why we go fierce, because that's our favorite, that's both of our favorite things.
because I believe that you should actually sacrifice. You should be more willing to sacrifice almost anything else other than yourself, honestly. I'll say this. So I get where you're going with the notion of self-sacrifice being something other than self-betrayal. What I think is that we can choose to give ourselves to something, right? But give it when you have it to give, right? And that's where that sensory awareness comes into play. But because you have to check in with your reserve, like what's in there. Do I have the emotional energy for this phone call? Do I have the emotional energy for this text message exchange?
Absolutely.
Do I have the emotional energy to go to that event, to show up in that space, right? Tap in with yourself and learn whether or not you have emotional energy. There are many times that we enter into self-sacrifice, not because, I think we get it confused where we're believing that it's because it is of our heart and it is, of our caring nature or what have you. Those things are true about you too. But a lot of times what puts you over the line into self-sacrifice and self-betrayal is some kind of trauma driving you there, right? It's well, if I don't, they're not going to love me the same. It's the perceived consequence, right? If I don't, they're no longer going to want to be involved with me, right? If I don't, they won't need me anymore. And why would they keep me around after that? There's some kind of trauma in your system that's driving you over the line.
It's a negative belief, right? A limiting belief that's actually driving your behavior.
Correct.
So what's the difference though? Let's talk about the difference between selfishness and self-care.
Self-preservation.
Yeah, because there is I'm just going to give you an example. So my daughter's an actress and she's doing big things. And at the top of, not top, but somewhere in the pandemic, I had to make a decision whether or not to get the vaccine, right? And I'm at high risk, which is a personal decision, right? I'm at high risk because of all the surgical complications that cause a long-term health condition.
Yeah.
And so I was more at risk for the virus, right?
Yeah.
But having to be on set, like in order to be there for my daughter, I made a decision. I said, I don't know whether or not if I didn't have a daughter, I would get the vaccine now because I might want to wait to take more time to evaluate it, right? But I also know that putting myself at risk, being around people on set and everything so that I can be there for her is actually causing me more harm, would cause me more potential danger, right?
Right.
So in that time, I made a decision. I don't want to stand in the way of my daughter's dreams, right? And so that was for me was the sacrifice of maybe I would have waited a little longer, right? But I chose the love for my daughter and to want to support her dreams to do it sooner, right? I was attacked all over the internet about, how could you, you're holistic, blah, blah, blah. Whatever, that's their issue.
Forgetting the vaccine.
You ain't walking in my shoes, right?
Yeah.
I'm not pushing for you to do. I'm telling you, make sure you get all the information so that you make the right decision for you, right? And I was sharing my personal experience, right?
Yeah.
Now, that to me was sacrifice, but not self-harm, right? It was still preserving myself because I was also doing it in support of my decision of the kind of mother I want to be for my daughter, right? So all of that, right? Does that read true? Does that ring true?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be clear that what you're talking about is sacrifice and not self-sacrifice, right?
Yes.
Because you self-preserved,
sacrifice versus
and you made a sacrifice in terms of, doing something where, you could have delayed it, or you could have debated it a little longer, or you could have chose to wait it out or what have you, but you went forward for the sake of supporting your daughter, right? So you did make a sacrifice, but that doesn't necessarily constitute a self-sacrifice, right?
So let's define terms, because the way I defined sacrifice and self-sacrifice was the same, and I want to make sure we distinguish it. So what would be a self-sacrifice?
Self-sacrifice would have been if you went without being vaccinated and put yourself at risk.
So it's self-harm.
Yeah, it's more
Self-sacrifice
in the way of
is the
self-harm, right?
opposite of
Yeah.
self-preservation.
So absolutely.
It's self-betrayal.
It's self-betrayal, right? It's the way that you leave yourself vulnerable and exposed to incur further injury, right? It's the way that you may drive yourself into depletion.
Yes.
For the sake of something else,
Yes.
right? You would have driven
Without
yourself potentially into depletion
refilling.
and self-harm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I'll give you my one-liner about the difference between selfishness and self-preservation.
All right.
Right? I first I'll say that I have clients all the time that's like, but I'm worried that I'm going to be selfish. And my response is always said, no selfish person ever. Selfish people don't worry about being selfish.
Yes, I love that.
Right?
I love that.
So you can guarantee yourself
person ever.
If you've ever said, oh, but I don't want to come off as selfish, you ain't selfish. Because selfish people don't worry about it. Selfish says, I care for myself only. Self-preservation says, I care for myself first so that I may care for others thereafter.
So, I come from, I have trauma around the way I was brought up, and it probably comes up in, abuse, emotional abuse, in me saying I am very particular about the kind of mother I want to be, right? When I say that, that is a trigger saying, well, I know that there were gaps in the way, and I know there was, missing pieces. I know there were things that were not present to give me, right? I look back now as someone who's been doing the work of healing, right, and done that work, and seeing, of course, always evolving, but seeing that, okay, you didn't have that, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that there aren't moments where, okay, you know what, that is selfish behavior. I can see it, and I can say, okay, you're not being present here for your child or your grandchild. Is selfish. Like, and I see it for what it is. I love you. I'm not going to entangle myself into trying to get you to not be selfish, right? But could it be that that's self-preservation on her end?
It's very possible.
It's very possible.
It's very possible that could be self-preservation is actually happening,
What about if you're if self-preservation is now damaging my child? That's where I want people to see, because I think that there's some lines there where if self-preservation is actually damaging as I grow up, like I was being told I wasn't being selfish, like I was just right, but I was also allowed to be abused, right? Like, but I couldn't handle it, but you allowed me to be abused. So how, what is that that delineation there? You see what I'm saying? Because I think people do see those and wonder, like, where does self-preservation and actual,
selfishness begin?
Right. Yeah.
So help me understand a little more, Coach Gessie. So your past trauma of abuse, right? And how that may then be delivered into your daughter.
Well, in the sense that, so looking back, I'm looking back,
in
and
retrospect.
I'm looking back at how there were places and times and ways that, my father was emotionally abusive, and my mother, I didn't, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do, but you let me be abused, right?
Right.
So I'm saying, like, that it was your self-preservation, but it was also me being abused. So it was also selfishness. Like, as a mother, I will kill for my daughter.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this because there are people who will define, I want to make sure we're distinguishing between selfishness and self-preservation, because there are people who think they're just preserving themselves, but really they're also harming people who are innocents. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I don't think that we can measure selfishness by the harm that someone else experiences, right?
Okay.
I think that people will self-preserve in whichever way they feel fit to preserve, right? The thing is that a lot of people have limitations
Yeah.
in how they manage themselves or how they
True.
protect themselves,
True.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what you described, without knowing it,
Mm-hmm.
many more of the details, right? So I just
Yes.
want to say
Right.
that,
Right. We're on a podcast. We're not
it's
in a therapy
right,
session.
right. It's limited.
Uh-huh.
But it very much sounds like, keep my head down, mouth shut,
Mm-hmm.
right? And, every man for himself
Right.
almost, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that would sound like I take care of myself only,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is that at that time, what they may have thought they were doing, what your mom may have thought they were doing was just self-preserving, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna keep my head down, mouth shut, so I don't get more of it,
Right.
right? So
Right.
it's very protective mode. And also you're being left out in the cold. Here's your child being left out in the cold, right?
Right.
So I think that it sounds very much like I do for myself only, but I think within the psyche, that it may have been a belief system that what I'm doing is self-preserving.
Yes.
And maybe,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of us have that attachment to keeping the peace, right? Now
Mm-hmm.
we're internally turbulent, but we're making sure that,
Well,
external
I don't want to
factors
upset that
are
person.
right. So I'm
I don't
not
want to
going to
upset that
rile it
person.
up. I
Mm-hmm.
also would say that right there was a great point too,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not until you really um, explore. I do what's called narrative work, right? Where we
Mm-hmm.
tell these
What's the story?
people's stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're these characters in our lives, our mothers, our fathers, our aunts, our uncles, etc. And when you start to look into someone's story, you start to see what they
Oh
learned
yeah.
about emotional wellness and what they did
Absolutely.
not learn about emotional wellness.
Absolutely.
And that's
Absolutely.
really where the answers are.
Yeah.
That's why I hesitate to give you too much, because that's really where the answers are.
Yeah. That's
It's so
why I said it
possible
wasn't,
that
if it's not
mom,
present, if it
yeah,
wasn't poured into, it wasn't someone that,
yeah. And I would just
however,
go back to the fact that it wasn't in
I
her
get
to
it.
give, right? And there could have been a belief system of, well, if I'm quiet and I don't add to it, maybe I'm lessening it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a lot of times we have these like belief systems that we're trying to, adopt and apply. And if you haven't had any real like grooming to your understanding of self-care and your understanding of self and the way that you navigate emotions and the way that you do compassionate care, the way that you
Mm-hmm.
do problem resolution, etc., you have a limited skill set, right?
Absolutely.
So before we even talk about was it selfish or self-preservation, I will just start at it wasn't in her to offer it to you.
It's true.
It
It's true.
just wasn't there,
It's true.
right? Whatever was displayed was what was put in there,
Yeah. But it doesn't
right?
change the fact that it was the experience.
It doesn't
I
change
say,
the fact that it was how it made you feel.
eh,
It doesn't change
yep.
the fact that you experienced the residual effects
Yeah.
of something that wasn't your
Right.
fault. It doesn't change the fact that trauma lives on inside of us,
Right.
right? So it doesn't
Right.
change anything about your experience. It always goes back to, and this is how I received it, and then you sort through it from
Right.
there.
So, so in terms of going back to the question of a person who's thinking, the person who says, am I being selfish? They're a person who's already thinking of others.
Mm-hmm.
But the person who, right, that's the way I'm processing it. Tell me if I'm
Right.
missing. And the
Absolutely. Yeah.
person who says, I'm never selfish, but is only thinking about themselves.
Yeah. I wonder if they'll ever even ponder the notion of selfishness a lot of
Well, I
times.
know
But yeah,
I brought it up. I've said, hey, that's selfish.
yeah,
Me, I've never been selfish.
yeah.
I'm like, what?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
So so I wanted to be real life about it because I know that there are people who are in these scenarios, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
they are managing around this trauma. I thank you for, taking the time to have the conversation with me around it because my husband always says, man, you tell everybody your business. I'm like, yeah, because if I share, then someone has
Real people heal
something that can
people.
help. Yeah, real people heal people, right? So I want people to know that it's not about everything, and I look at everything you share, it's not about their response.
Hmm.
It's all about what you're setting for yourself in terms of what you desiring for yourself, what who you're becoming, who you're choosing to become, and who you're in the process of becoming, right? Because you're starting a new narrative. You're
Yeah.
changing the narrative for who you are and who you're going to show up to be in this world.
So true,
And
Coach
you
Gessie.
know,
And I just want to leave your audience with this. The greatest gift that you can give yourself is the gift of self-knowledge
mm,
and self-acceptance,
ooh,
right? Once
yes,
you have
yes,
self-knowledge and self-acceptance, then the goal is just to manage what you know about yourself and
hmm
manage your relationship to yourself and your relationship to the rest of the world.
hmm absolutely. And self-acceptance doesn't mean that, you know what, I'm really bad in this area and that's just the way it's always going to be.
Mhm.
It means, man, ooh, I am bad in this area, but it doesn't have to stay that way. I can
Yeah,
get the help
it's it's
of
acknowledging that this is
precious.
where I am today,
Yes,
right? This is where I am today, and what does
yes.
that mean for how I emote? How does that mean? What does that mean for how I behave?
Hmm.
What does that mean for how I interact today,
Today,
right? I always
where
encourage
I
you to
am
put today
today,
at the end of the
and
statement, right? Like I've
that's
been,
good.
really showing out today, so it always leaves room for growth beyond that.
I love that. And that is a beautiful place to say, I am. Oh, one more thing I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of studies around D3
Yeah.
levels, right? And the
Yeah.
connection to mental health,
Hmm.
right? Sharper memory,
Hmm.
clarity, and just sense of well-being with regards to um, the sense of personal, yeah, I would say mood, right? Your
Yeah.
mood, the way you
Mood.
feel about yourself,
Yep.
right? And I think a big thing is that people of color are disproportionately, of course, I think it's 76% of
Hmm.
Black people, African Americans,
Hmm.
are vitamin D deficient
Yep.
because our melanin
Melanin.
blocks the absorption
Yep.
of the sun, right?
Yep.
And that means that we need more exposure to the sun in order to activate our melanocytes so that our bodies will produce the vitamin D hormone,
Hmm.
right? So there's a lot that can be going on in your emotional well-being
Hmm.
that could be directly connected to vitamin D deficiency,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
And so can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So vitamin D deficiency will lower your mood. It will increase anxiety. It will contribute to a general feeling of fatigue and lethargy.
Hmm. And brain
So
fog. Hmm.
brain fog, right?
Hmm.
Concentration, focus, etc. So a lot of people are, moving on to like psychotropic
Yes,
medications, etc.
yes,
Um, and which is going to impact like neurotransmitters and
yes,
endorphins, and
yes.
it's very possible that you
It could
don't
be that.
have like a lower firing of neurotransmitters and endorphins, and what you actually have is a vitamin D deficiency. So,
Absolutely.
you'll actually oftentimes see with children and adolescents who are having reports of
Hmm.
depression, where one of
And
the first
migraines too,
things,
headaches too. Hmm.
right. So
Hmm.
one of the first things they do is put them on a vitamin D
Hmm.
supplement, right? So I definitely encourage that
Get
people
your
are out there
numbers.
doing that exploration of vitamin D. Maybe give yourself the privilege of starting a vitamin D supplement. I know that am chronically vitamin D
Hmm.
deficient.
Well, you have that beautiful melanin, girl.
Thank you,
That beautiful.
girl.
And the thing is, if you're not getting
Yeah,
midday sun, which is
yeah,
between 12 and 2, and during the winter, it doesn't even really exist unless you're in
right.
tropical countries, right?
So a lot
So
of
it's
times the
important.
doctor will start you on that like high
Hmm.
dose to just kind of get
Hmm.
you, into
Increasing,
motion, and then you can continue it
maintain.
with yes, to maintain it with a or over the
Yeah,
counter vitamin D.
that's so important because, actually, another thing I wanted to say is don't just, number one, if you are, a person of color with melanin, and you are, like I said, 76% of the time, we are vitamin D deficient.
Mhm.
So that's going to mean you can assume you're vitamin D deficient. However, even as you start to take vitamin D, you need to go get your levels checked. Okay.
Absolutely.
That's number one. I actually was taking it at the top of this because it's in our prevention kit. Our D3 is certified and tested, and it's 5,000 IUs in one dose, which is a really good number.
It is a good
It's a
number.
really
Yeah.
great number, and it's the cholecalciferol, which is the most bioavailable form of D3. Okay, which
Wonderful.
D3, not D2. And this is important because when we look at, I want to make sure we get tested, because a lot of times, and this is something I wish I'd known. They'll tell you, oh, the normal range is 30 to, let's say, 80,
Mm-hmm.
normal range,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, oh yeah, you didn't come up as your numbers are all normal, but your number's like 30. Okay.
Yeah.
And if your number is 30, that's called low normal. It's really just over the curve. So that is not going to be high enough to get you the clarity, the function of what your D3 hormone needs in order to be really high functioning. Okay. That's really important, because I have seen so many women who they're like, oh yeah, it's normal. Oh, I'm just like 30, I'm 31, I'm 32. Like, no, that's not
And
high enough.
that's where it's important to be your own advocate.
Advocate. That's why I want them to know the
You
numbers, because you
have
want
to
your
be an
numbers.
advocate, because no matter what they tell you, you tell them how you've been
That's
feeling,
right.
right?
That's right.
So that may be the number
You
by,
can cause insomnia,
we already
right?
know that the numbers are often skewed and not always built for all populations anyway, right?
That's right.
So
Hmm.
regardless
And
of
we
the
have
number, if I'm
disproportionate
experienced,
chronic stress. We have disproportionate, right,
right,
experiences of chronic stress. So that low 30 number is, what's that going to do for
and
you,
how you're
right?
metabolizing things, all
Yep,
of that, right? So
absolutely.
if you are feeling those symptoms, you are feeling those symptoms. So yes, that may be, within range, but if it's on the low end, I need to boost it up,
Yep,
because I need to address these symptoms, or at least have,
absolutely.
a chance
Yeah.
at it.
And there was
Yeah.
a woman who asked a question about fibroids. I'm going to say, sis, please. In fact, the vitamin D hormone is literally the number one hormone your body uses to fight inflammation and tumor.
Mm.
So that's why it's in our fibroids kit. It's also if you've had any kind of, surgery, or you're trying to prevent the development of fibroids or some
Mm-hmm.
sort of hormonal
Mm-hmm.
imbalance. Our
Yeah.
prevention kit has our hormonal balance supplement, which is, again, because the three, what we talk about is the three things that as Black people we're disproportionately affected by is hormonal imbalance because of the
Mm-hmm.
chronic stress and inflammation, chronic inflammation, right, which our mass supplement addresses because it helps control levels of inflammation, and vitamin D deficiency. And the reason we put those together to create our prevention kit was because we found that if we target the three things that as people of color we're most affected by that lead to inflammatory conditions,
Mm-hmm.
we can help make such a substantial change in our health and take back control, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So go to your physician, get tested, find out what your number is, and definitely take our free quiz that's linked at the pin at the bottom. It's thedetoxnow.com. It's right on the homepage at thedetoxnow.com. Please follow The Modern Therapist at The Modern Therapist. What's the best way for them to contact you, Precious?
Follow, direct message. My email is linked to my account. My website is linked to my account. You
Awesome.
can find me in one of those ways for sure.
So The Modern Therapist
The
is
modern
now, she's
therapist.
your new BFF. All right. Now, y'all have had so many gems tonight, like so many gems. Please do not let this be the last part of your conversation with this amazing, incredible woman. Because, like I said, the gems were just like, so
I
many. I
so
can't wait.
appreciate you, Coach
Oh my
Gessie,
God.
for inviting me, for having me, and just for this platform. You're doing so much good work.
Thank
Our
you, sis.
community is reaping so many benefits from the messaging that you put out, the talks that you
Thank
have, the products that
you.
you deliver, your tenacity and your energy. I'm always like, I don't know how Coach Gessie always has this energy. money, honey. That's because she over there taking all her supplements.
That's right.
And she is
I'm a
living that
patient
best
first.
life. I love it.
I'm a
I
client
so
first.
appreciate you.
Well, I love and appreciate you. Thank you so much, Precious. I'm going to let
Absolutely.
you go and then I'll
All
close
right.
out. You are
Thank
the
you
best. We'll do this
guys.
again because you know we're gonna have more conversations.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. You know we get going, we get gone.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much. Have a good
Right.
night.
And we're gonna share this live because some people I know they're like, please, are you gonna share this? Yes, we're gonna share it so that you can replay it.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, my dear. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know this went a little long, but she's absolutely, it was, I think, a very timely conversation in lieu of whether you're listening to this, you know, around the holidays or just, you know, there's always, I don't know why my hair is doing this. I'm going to just take a minute to lay it down. There we go. There's always family trauma, whether it's holidays or not holidays. So whenever you're listening to this, this is still going to be relevant for you because there's always going to be, there are always going to be triggers and trauma that we are navigating around. And we want you to know, whatever, if you are dealing with a health issue, you are not alone. You are not alone. If you are trying to help your body prevent, reverse heavy periods, let's not wait till they become fibroids, but heavy and painful periods, to maybe it's fibroids or endometriosis, maybe it's diabetes. We have added, we have now a sugar health supplement that is to help with your glucose control, your blood sugar level control that you can add to the prevention kit or get it by itself. That's one of the major chronic issues that plague our African American and communities of color, as well as high blood pressure. You can add our heart health supplement to your kit or just get that. You know, Taj of SWV has spoken very openly about how that's been a very helpful tool in helping to manage her blood pressure. And our water fast. There's so many ways we are here to support you. And tell nobody I told you, but wait till, you know, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. I'll say that, our free newsletter at thedetoxnow.com, so that you can have early access to all of our wonderful sales and specials. I'll say that. So please, if you're not sure what you need, go ahead and take our free quiz at thedetoxnow.com. That's thedetoxnow.com. So you can get our recommendations on what we have for you and get a code to save 25%. And if you need additional guidance, go ahead and sign up for one of our free consultation options, or you can book a private one, because you are not alone. We are here to support you, and we want you to know that we love you and we are committed to help you know better, do better, so you can live better. Good night.